Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Access Blockbusters Pod. It is episode number 27. Welcome back to the YouTube channel or wherever you're listening. If it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, wherever you are listening to the podcast, welcome one and all to the 27th episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod, the official podcast of the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel. And guys, we are so close, so incredibly close. It blows my mind to 1,000 subscribers. So if you haven't already, it would just mean the absolute world to me if you could go to the YouTube channel, the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel. If you like what you see there, if you like what you're hearing on the podcast, if you could please just subscribe to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, it would just make my day. It would mean the world to me. And honestly, I mean, not to go too off track here, because we're not going to be here talking about the Access Blockbusters channel for too much longer. As obviously we have some things with regards to movies and other things in pop culture that have been going on the last couple of weeks. But I just wanted to digress a little bit here and say that when I started the YouTube channel in June, I think it was June of 2020, right when the peak of the pandemic was, it was a hobby. It was something that I wanted to do just for fun, just to, have something, just to try something new and really, share my thoughts on movies and film and television and whatnot. But it quickly became something a little more than that. And even then, at that point, I said that, the one goal that I had at the time was 1,000 subscribers. I thought if I could hit 1,000 subscribers, then that would just be incredible. And guys, we're on the cusp. We are on the cusp. And so thank you so much for allowing me to even fathom and dream of this goal and allow it to become a reality, hopefully in the next few weeks. And I can't wait to see where we go from here. I have some really exciting things in store for this year and for next year and beyond. And hopefully you guys are enjoying the videos. Hopefully you guys are enjoying the podcast and all that kind of stuff. I'm editing a video right now that I'm hoping will be coming out in maybe a week or so, a couple weeks, that hopefully a lot of you will like. I won't say anything more about that, but yeah. Welcome back to the podcast. We have a lot to discuss today, including things such as the MCU in the second half of 2023. What is going on there? What should we be expecting? We're going to be talking a little bit about Disney and their live-action remakes, just, what the point of them is and whether or not Disney should keep making them. In relation to The Little Mermaid, which I saw recently. I didn't want to do a full review of The Little Mermaid. I'll talk a little bit about what I thought about that movie as we go along. But again, just thinking about what the Disney live-action remakes are signaling about Disney and the direction of the company. And then finally, we will be talking about Across the Spider-Verse. I know I'm a couple weeks late. I was not available last week to record a podcast episode, but I did see Across the Spider-Verse on the Friday night that it opened, or I believe Saturday night that it opened. And I'd like to share some thoughts. Maybe perhaps not as not as popular as perhaps some other people's opinions, and that's totally fine. I've never been shy about sharing my thoughts on, whatever's going on. I'm just here to share my thoughts and hear yours, because that's really the point of this podcast and this YouTube channel, is to have a dialogue and to really think through and talk about, movies and television shows and all that kind of good stuff. So, again, make sure to subscribe to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel or leave a review, iTunes, Spotify, all that kind of stuff. And let's get into it. Before we get into the actual main topics of the podcast, though, I did want to bring up a couple things that I will not be talking about, at least for the time being. And so the first of which I will not be talking about, at least for now. We will see how things develop. But I wanted to address quickly that I did see that Tenoch Huerta, who played Namor, I keep wanting to say Namor, but it is Namor, I believe, in Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I did see that there were some allegations against him. And if you're interested in hearing about what's going on, there's more than enough news sources to go around that you'll find that information. I myself will not be talking about it because there have been no official convictions or anything like that. These are just, I'm not here to take sides yet. And I really, until there is evidence and until there is definitive proof, I'm really not here to comment on whatever's going on. Obviously, there will be implications. If it goes one way, there will be implications for the MCU. But again, at that point, we can talk about it then. I really don't want to get into people's personal dramas. I will, you guys know I'm not shy about, condemning, just really terrible things, in my opinion, such as just racist behavior, sexist, misogynistic behavior, homophobic behavior, discriminatory behavior, and then again, obviously condemning things like violence and abuse and things like that. So again, if and when there is evidence, we might talk about this, just depending on if it, affects the MCU and what this could mean. But I'm not here to talk about that right now. And the same, I just wanted to say the same goes for Jonathan Majors as well. Sort of a similar situation, unfortunately. And we'll just kind of have to see how that plays out. So I just wanted to say that up front. So that's the first thing. The second thing is more of a more of a permanent thing that I will not be talking about. I have made it clear in the past, and I've done a lot of thinking about this. It's obviously, now that the movie's coming out this week. For those of you who know, I said a while ago in a podcast episode that I will not be watching the Flash movie. This was maybe a year ago. I didn't want to watch the Flash movie in theaters because I thought, I thought Warner. It was mostly, obviously Ezra Miller's behavior was appalling and just, from what we've seen, it was deplorable. But also just Warner Brothers' lack of reaction to that. And I've since, and I want to be very clear, this is entirely consistent with what I've been saying. And I want to make it clear that it's not just sort of me backtracking on something I said earlier. I made it very clear that, given contrary evidence and given sort of how the progression of the events changed and whatnot, that I would be willing to change my mind. And what I said recently and what I'm going to stick by is that at this point in time, whether or not I do go see the Flash movie, which honestly I'm still very much conflicted about at this point, because I understand that, Ezra Miller, their behavior is just appalling. But on the other hand, I also understand that this was not entirely Warner Brothers' fault, although I really am not happy with the fact that they didn't do anything in the moment to react to it. But I also understand that Andy Muschietti, Sasha Kaye, I believe, Michael Keaton, Michael Shannon, and all the people who made the film also worked really hard to make what everyone seems to be thinking is a pretty good film. So again, my personal stance on whether or not I'm going to see the movie still is up for debate. I still don't know. But what I said recently, I think in a community post, is that, and this is really the definitive stance about the Flash for me, and then we'll move on. Is that I will not be covering the Flash in any capacity on this YouTube channel. So this is probably the last time you will hear me talk about the Flash as the movie. I will not be reviewing it. I will not be talking about my thoughts on it in any capacity. And really, the only times I would be referencing the Flash is maybe in terms of how it might affect the future of the DCU in relation to other news. So, like, for example, if I haven't seen the movie, obviously, but if the Flash ends up having this cliffhanger ending where it resets the DCU and stuff like that, it'll come up, right? Like, if we're talking about James Gunn's first, Gods and Monsters chapter, the first chapter of the DCU, obviously it'll come up that, like the Flash reset the DC, whatever. But other than in that kind of capacity, in passing or sort of in reference to other things and other topics, I will not be discussing the Flash anymore on the YouTube channel. It has been a roller coaster. I still stand by the fact that I am very, very much upset that Warner Brothers did not make any comments or statements at the time of Ezra Miller's initial, the revelation of Ezra Miller's initial behavior and whatnot. But that being said, it's a complicated situation, and I respect and understand anything that anyone says about the situation in terms of watching the movie, not watching the movie, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's a very complicated conversation, and it's one that I wanted to have one more time here on the podcast, and then we will move on to other things. So again, this is the last that you will be hearing about the Flash. Okay, so with all that being out of the way, let's get into the first of three topics that I wanted to discuss in today's podcast episode, and the first of which I think I said them out of order in my initial intro, but the first thing that I wanted to talk about, sort of in conjunction with The Little Mermaid, which opened up a few weeks ago and I got a chance to see, is the Disney Live-Action Remakes. So for those of you who have been sort of keeping up with Disney and the movies that they've been making, you'll know that they really have shifted their focus over the past 10 or so years to remaking a lot of their beloved animated classics. Now, this has been done to varying levels of success, both critically and financially, and it's so much so that even a couple of them, I believe, Peter Pan and Wendy recently, and then when Disney Plus first launched in 2019, Lady and the Tramp had a live-action remake, which was interesting. But all that to say is that, the level of success and acceptance from the audiences and from the critics has been mixed, and really has not, been met with the resounding success that I think Disney wants them to have, them being the live action remakes. And so, in watching The Little Mermaid, one thing that crossed my mind a couple times is sort of thinking about what the point of these live action remakes are, whether or not they're worth continuing, and what they might mean moving forward for Disney. And so the first thing that I wanted to talk about really is why Disney is remaking basically their entire animated library. So I don't remember what the first one was that they did. You could go back, I think, to maybe Alice in Wonderland, although I'm not sure that was entirely a remake in the most traditional of senses. But, you've had your Cinderellas, you've had your Jungle Books, and Beauty and the Beasts, and then Maleficent as well. I feel like that was sort of the first wave. And then since then, you've had your Aladdins, your Dumbos, Lion Kings, Mulans, and this year, obviously, the Little Mermaid. And so, I mean, the first thing that strikes me is that, this is a more cynical look on the whole thing, but it's something that I think is really driving the whole, I think there are two ways to look at it, is what I'll say. So the first is obviously a little bit more cynical, and it's profit, it's money, right? Because yes, these IP, these properties are very recognizable. Obviously, the entirety of Disney is really built upon the animation renaissance that took place in the 90s. You go to Disneyland, for example, and obviously before Marvel and Star Wars, it was all sort of built upon the Disney, quote unquote, Disney princess era of Disney animation. And so, I think it's a very surefire way to at least make some money. And whether or not these movies are making money to the extent that Disney wants them to, a la, for example, Mulan, although Mulan obviously came out during the pandemic on Disney Plus, or even The Little Mermaid, which doesn't look like it's going to make an incredible amount of profit, even though it looks like it might profit a little bit. I think goes to show that you can then have films like Aladdin and The Lion King, which both made over $1 billion, and those really, I think those seem to justify or maybe even outweigh these other films that aren't making as much money. So the first thing obviously is recognizability. Parents know these properties, children know these properties, because they've probably been watching the animated ones. And, the parents might have nostalgia for them. They might want to introduce their kids to these. And Disney knows that. And Disney knows that these films are going to make money. You throw out a movie like, and this is sort of the cynics argument, right? I'll get more into what I believe is a more hopeful and optimistic viewpoint about this. But the cynics argument is that, why would we want to, put out an original movie like, say, I don't know, I like a Frozen, for example, which is a bad example because Frozen became instantly popular. But for example, like, an original movie when we could just remake our entire catalog. Okay, fine. So there's that. I think the other side of that coin is something that maybe speaks a little bit more towards my own situation, because like I've said many times on this YouTube channel, one of the first videos I did, by the way, was a Pixar movies tier list. And one of the first things that I've said on this YouTube channel is that I didn't grow up a Disney animation kid. I really did not. I grew up a Pixar kid. So Pixar was really the animation that I grew up watching. And because of that, this might shock some of you, I never grew up watching a lot of the animation from Disney proper. And so while I probably had seen most of these movies once when I was really young, they never ever had a lasting impression on me. And the flip side to this whole capitalist profit-driven argument is that these live action remakes are a way to reintroduce a new audience to Disney's sort of brand. I mean, let's be honest, right? It's not like it's really not like these characters are sort of just one. I mean, you could argue that with Marvel and Star Wars, they are now just sort of one part of Disney's brand. But let's be honest, when kids think of Disney, they don't think of Star Wars, they don't think of Marvel, they think of Aladdin and Mulan and Beauty and the Beast. And I think that this, in a way, is one way to reintroduce their library to a new generation with updated visual effects and all that kind of stuff. And to be honest with you, when these live action remakes work, they work for somebody like me who has really no attachment or memory of these original films. And I understand that based on a lot of reviews that I've seen that, it's upsetting when a movie, a live action remake gets it really wrong, because it just feels, I don't know, hopeless that why would you even do this in the first place when you have a movie like Pinocchio and then you make this weird live action Pinocchio movie that nobody seemed to like. And I think that that's an argument that I definitely understand, but it's not one that resonates with me personally, because for me, when I see a Disney live action remake that really does resonate with me, I really enjoy it, and it's like it's being introduced to me for the first time. Obviously, I know the general the general story brushstrokes of Beauty and the Beast or Aladdin or The Little Mermaid, but when these live action remakes work, and I'm gonna say that, for instance, The Jungle Book is my favorite live action remake that Disney has done. I love Jon Favreau's The Jungle Book, and it's because it introduces me to a story that I wasn't entirely familiar with. And let's be honest, the original Jungle Book, at least in my opinion, the way that it was done and animated and things like that, I'm sure it's wonderful for a great many people, but for me, it's just sort of an old animated Disney film that I really had no interest in watching. And so now seeing it updated and seeing it brought to quote unquote live action with all those CGI animals, but whatever, is a way to reintroduce Disney's library. So you have sort of these two sides of the coin. That being said, even though I am more sympathetic to the argument that, I think that there is some value to be had from these Disney live action remakes, and I'm willing to hope that it's not entirely profit driven, although obviously everything in Hollywood is entirely profit driven, if we're being honest. But I also think that this is a little bit worrying to me, because we're nearing the end, I think, of all of the big live action Disney remakes that you can make. And what it's going to do is it's going to force Disney to really reevaluate what kind of content they can make. And I mean, look, it's one thing to say, yes, look at Aladdin. I really like the live action Aladdin. I really do like the live action Aladdin. And I enjoyed The Little Mermaid quite a bit as well. But what we could have been having instead of those, properties is we could have been having more original content. And let's be honest, right? That's how Disney thrived in the first place. I know that a lot of the Disney Disney animated content in the 90s was based on existing, fairy tales and things like that. Obviously something like The Little Mermaid or the Lion King sort of being based on Hamlet and things like that. But that being said, it's when originality strikes is when Disney can continue to expand itself. So I used the example of Frozen a little bit ago, but you have something like a Frozen, which I think is an incredibly successful franchise because Disney was able to capitalize on an original idea. I think that something like The Incredibles, when that first came out, I think Pixar was, in its heyday, incredibly good at capitalizing on new ideas, new innovative ideas, and then letting them marinate for however much time that they would allow for. So, for example, while Toy Story did have 2 sequels, and I'm talking about just sort of the first sort of big phase of Pixar. Obviously, I think we moved into the next chapter with Toy Story 4s and whatnot. I think that there was still sort of like things to explore within that property. Then you had your Monsters Inc. and you had your your Incredibles, your Ratatouilles, your Wall-E's. And I think that originality really sparks great properties, great new stories that you can then expand upon. You have Frozen 2, you will have a Frozen 3. You had Toy Story 1, you have 2, 3, and I guess you have 4 and 5 now that 5's coming out. I guess you have Inside Out too, and we'll see how that goes. My point here, I guess, and I know I've been rambling on for a little bit now, and I apologize, but I wanted to make the point that while I don't think there's anything inherently harmful to remaking the Disney animation into live action, I also think that it's robbing us a little bit. It's depriving us of the originality that made Disney so special in the first place. And it's sort of dulling Disney's magical effect, if you will. Because yes, I'm watching The Little Mermaid for the first time, and it's for the first time as in being reintroduced to The Little Mermaid, because I remember the story and all that kind of stuff from the animation, but it just wasn't as familiar to me. But it dawns on me that it still feels a little bit bland, not because of the movie itself, but because I feel like we've been here and done that before. And while I'm very happy to have, the live action Aladdin film because I really like it. And I'm very happy to have the live action Jungle Book because I really like it. It just feels like Disney is stalling and stagnating a little bit. And we'll talk about Marvel in just a second. But one of the things that I think would really benefit Disney as it goes through a little bit of a period of turmoil with almost all of its franchises, frankly, Pixar, Star Wars, Disney Animation, Marvel, I think it could use that spark again. And so I hope that once this sort of wave is done, we can say, okay, that was fun. We got some good movies out of that. We also got some not so good movies out of that. Let's move on and let's try something new. And I'm really hoping that even live action Disney can make some really great films as well. Okay. And by the way, this also extends to remaking or making films based on their rides. Like that's cool, I think, to an extent, but also isn't it even cooler that you make, your own original film and then you base a ride off of that? I feel like that's that much better. But anyways, I'm just here for more innovative original content, and I hope that Disney can deliver that. All right, let's talk about our second topic, which is the MCU in the second half of 2023. So on this podcast, I haven't had a chance to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I haven't had a chance to talk about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Just to sort of recap my quick thoughts on those two films, I enjoyed Quantumania. I think a lot of MCU fans at least enjoyed Quantumania. I think a lot of non-MCU fans really didn't enjoy Quantumania. I had some problems with it. Obviously, I think that I think the visual aesthetic of the film is very odd. It feels very fake a lot of the time. I think that Kang was really cool in the film. But the way that they're setting up Kang as a villain doesn't feel as compelling as other characters. People have pointed out that he's died in every appearance that he's come in, and that's true. It goes to show sort of like, how are we going to say that this villain is formidable if you're just going to kill him every single time? And then if the argument is that he's just going to appear in different variants every single time, that's not as interesting to me. But anyways, just sticking with Quantumania as a film in itself, I think that, I think there was very, very little development for the characters. I think that was one of the other points that really kind of stuck with me, is that Scott, he has the sense of sort of paranoia at the end of the film, but it just didn't feel like the characters did much of anything at all. They defeated Kang, they got out, the end. Okay, great. So I enjoyed Quantumania. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. And it's sort of just there. And Kang was in there. And that was that. Then we had Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I've seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 twice now. And I enjoyed it. I know some people say it's one of the greatest MCU films since Endgame, since No Way Home. I don't agree with that in particular, though I will say that the first two Guardians films were not necessarily my favorite in the MCU. I did really enjoy them. I really liked the first Guardians film. I enjoy the second one. I think it has its moments, and I think it has some really good emotional moments at the end as well. But the Guardians have never been my all-time favorite franchise in the MCU. For just to say that. I think that the third film sort of falls very squarely in line with the first and second films. I think I would put Volume 3 pretty much about as in the middle between Volume 1, which I have first of the trilogy, and Volume 2, which I have third in the trilogy. I think it's about as even as you can get. And I think that James Gunn made 3 very solid, good films. I think that the emotion and the humor that you're able to get, while the humor, I think, bent on a little bit too silly, too shticky, if that makes sense. Like, I know a lot of people sort of enjoy the ways in which James Gunn is able to manipulate humor and have characters just have these weird conversations in the middle of fight scenes or whatever. I think that worked incredibly well for a show like Peacemaker, where characters are just riffing and talking about all these sorts of random things. Because, I mean, I have the time to invest in a TV show. When I'm in a 2-hour movie and I'm watching this 3-minute bit about Drax putting his feet up on the couch, it feels a little bit unnecessary to me, if that makes sense. But I know that that's James Gunn's sensibilities as a filmmaker, and it's just not for me in that sense. At least in a movie, because I really did like that in Peacemaker. But I think that the emotion that they brought was incredible. It was really good. I think that the characters are really well set up, and I think that the way that they ended it, felt like a good way to end out James Gunn's time in the MCU. That being said, one thing that is severely lacking in the MCU right now is cohesion, and I think that this has been the case basically the entirety of Phase 4. There is very little cohesion. You have individual storylines that are beginning to sort of maybe lead somewhere, although I have frankly no idea if that's the case. For example, WandaVision and Spider-Man No Way Home to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, with Loki kind of hanging around there. Like that's maybe something. And then you have, I don't know, Black Widow and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, maybe leading to your Captain America Brave New World, which it got a new title, very cool. And Thunderbolts, okay. And maybe kind of Hawkeye in there as well. Okay, sure. And then you have, frankly, I don't know what to do with Moon Knight. Frankly, I don't know what to do with Guardians 3. It just feels like there's really no, or She-Hulk for that matter. It frankly feels like there's very little cohesion in the MCU right now, because while when the MCU was just 6 Avengers, right, post the first Avengers, it was very easy to say, look, in Iron Man 3, Iron Man's off on his own own adventures. And the other members of the MCU, the others, 5 Avengers, they're just doing their own things as well. And there's 6 people, and Nick Fury just somewhere hanging out. And Nick Fury, look, was in the Winter Soldier, and so was Black Widow. So it kind of felt like, hey, that makes sense, right? So like you have Iron Man doing his own thing on Earth in California, maybe, and then you have Thor in space somewhere. Okay, that's fine. And you have Cap and Black Widow doing their own thing with Nick Fury, and then you have Hulk somewhere doing something, and Hawkeye doing something. It made sense, right? Because the world was a lot bigger, and it felt like there was room for all of these Avengers. Well, now post Endgame, it just feels like there isn't enough room for all of the characters that are appearing. Like, yes, you can say that, okay, maybe She-Hulk is kind of hanging out in LA, and maybe, Hawkeye is hanging out in New York, but then there's also Spider-Man, and there's also Daredevil and Kingpin, which I guess are sort of crossing over, and then they're going to introduce Echo in there. What about New Jersey with Agatha? What about literally a Celestial appearing out of the sky, and in London, like nobody seems freaked out about that. What about a frozen Celestial in the middle of the ocean? It just feels disjointed, and I think what we're more used to is these storylines interconnecting and weaving together in a way that feels cohesive. So while on the surface, right, we could have a Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 that was separate from the MCU. We then, very closely before that had Captain America Civil War, and we very closely after that had Spider-Man Homecoming, which, connected very well to the fabric of the MCU. Even Black Panther, at least, was introduced in Civil War. And Thor Ragnarok had the Hulk. So it feels like the MCU is missing that. And look, I have not hated any bit of MCU content. The closest that I've gotten is probably She-Hulk. And even She-Hulk, I enjoyed some bits of it. I didn't hate other bits of it, like with a passion, but I didn't like a lot of it. But I didn't hate it. So, I think that quality-wise, like it's about the quality, because I think that there are certain bits of MCU content that are lacking the quality for sure. But I also think that it's about sort of what made the MCU so special, which is that the MCU is not just a bunch of individual properties. It's also a collection of stories that are leading to a bigger story, which is, I guess, for now, the Kang Dynasty. We'll see what happens with Jonathan Majors, but the Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars. So all that to say is that I think that the rest of 2023 for the MCU, and actually 2024 for that matter, are going to be very important for setting up what is going to happen going forward. I think that we're going to be able to start seeing some connective tissues going on, and I wanted just to talk about what we should expect from the rest of 2023 heading into 2024 for the MCU. So first of all, we have Secret Invasion. Now, Secret Invasion is already a show that I think is going to tie together a lot of loose threads, because I mean, literally, and this is not speculation, right? It's not like I don't know, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where we're like, is Spider-Man going to show up? It's literally, we have the War Machine, Rhodey, who seems to be some sort of pivotal figure in the government, and we have Everett Ross is back. We have Kobe Smulders as Maria Hill, and then the show is obviously billed as Samuel L. Jackson's sort of show as Nick Fury, but also Ben Mendelsohn is there as Talos. There might even be there actually probably definitely will be some Captain Marvel tie-ins, because Nick Fury shows up in the Marvels, which we'll talk about in just a second. So I think Secret Invasion is going to start drawing together a lot of maybe some of these Earth threads, right? Like you have your Wakandan governments, maybe your vibranium wars or whatever's going on with Wakanda Forever, and you have your sort of government espionage, maybe Falcon and the Winter Soldier. You have your war machines there. So I think that a lot of maybe the Earth kind of based threats, especially the more grounded ones, are going to start being tied together with Secret Invasion, and that's really exciting. And on top of that, it just looks like a really fun show as well. And then you have the Marvels, which is the third and last movie to come out in 2023. And the Marvels obviously leads directly from Secret Invasion, in the sense that I guess Nick Fury survives, although I don't know, maybe that Nick Fury is a Skrull, who knows? I guess that's sort of the excitement about Secret Invasion, is that maybe not so much that you don't think that Nick Fury is going to survive, but rather that you don't quite know what Nick Fury you're looking at any given point in these trailers and promo materials. So that's exciting. But yeah, I think that, The Marvels is another movie that's going to connect a lot of things. It's going to connect sort of the more cosmic power base that the MCU has. So you have your Kamala Khan's, and you have your Monica Rambeau's, character from WandaVision and character from Miss Marvel. And on top of that, I think Miss Marvel is priming to set up a connection between Shang-Chi, which with the Bengals and with the Ten Rings as well. So you're starting to connect these sort of power bases together as well. And I think that that's really interesting. So I'm hoping that these two properties can begin to sort of allow the MCU to coalesce into something that's a little bit more cohesive. I mean, the elephant in the room is still the Eternals. I have no idea what's going on with them, but I'm hoping that they will sort of begin to make their presence known in the future. On top of that, we have two more shows coming out in 2023. We have Loki Season 2, which, frankly, I mean, Loki Season 2, what I'm hoping for in Loki Season 2 is just a better explanation of the TVA and sort of time travel, and maybe a better idea of where we're heading in sort of the bigger picture. So while Miss Marvel and Secret Invasion, while The Marvels and Secret Invasion might be sort of tying up these storylines, it's these sort of sub-storylines, I guess, within the MCU, I'm hoping that Loki will drive us towards a bigger final picture. As for Echo, which will come out in November and which will drop all of its episodes at once, which I frankly don't know if that means that they just really don't have confidence in the show or not. I think that Echo is sort of a vestige of let's give everyone a spin-off show, which is great. Like I think Maya Lopez was a fine part of Hawkeye, and I'm interested in the character, but when I think Marvel is being spread too thin, you have your Agatha show and your Echo show, and I'm like, sure, okay, I'm interested, but I think that Echo will obviously establish her as a character, but will also lead into Daredevil Born Again, which I'm hoping will also begin to sort of tie together sort of the New York City storyline. So your Hawkeyes and your Spider-Man No Way Homes. Your Falcon and Winter Soldiers maybe a little bit as well. Daredevil Born Again being 18 episodes is going to have, I would assume, a pretty big impact in the MCU. And so I'm excited about that. So I think, and Daredevil Born Again will come out in 2024. And then just looking forward a little bit to 2024, like obviously you have your Blades and your Deadpool 3s, which, I think will be fun. Hopefully, given the production delays with the writer's strike and the script issues with Blade. But, I think also the two big tentpole films that year are going to be Thunderbolts and are going to be Captain America: Brave New World. And I think those two films will really give us a better sense as well of what the state of the Avengers are and what the state of the world really is in the MCU. And so I'm hoping that what Captain America Brave New World and Thunderbolts can do is tie together basically everything across the MCU that isn't magical or cosmic or TVA related. Because I think that those, as long as we can tie together a lot of other things and sort of get a better picture of what the Avengers are like, and sort of see what kind of team of heroes we're going to be, using moving forward, I think that would be a really big win for Marvel. So I'm talking literally everything from your Falcon and Winter Soldier, even Shang-Chi if possible, your Hawkeyes, obviously, with Yelena Belova, your Spider-Man No Way Homes, even, although maybe a little bit less. So I don't know about Moon Knight, maybe Moon Knight, Miss Marvel, maybe, but then things like Black Widow, obviously, having a big influence with Taskmaster, Yelena, and the Red Guardian, as well as, you could even tie in the Eternals if the rumors are true that the Tiamat sort of big giant Eternal or Celestial in the middle of the ocean is sort of a catalyst, but as well as She-Hulk, maybe the Hulks will be involved with the leader's involvement in Captain America Brave New World. So there are a lot of possibilities and ways, obviously Wakanda Forever as well, maybe with the War for Vibranium. I think that there are a lot of ways to really bring a lot of these storylines together, and that's what I'm hoping that the MCU can do moving forward. Because again, what I think we're missing right now is just a sense of direction. I think the quality of the projects have been fairly good, but I also think that a lot of it has to do with just a lack of direction from the MCU as a whole. So we'll see where we go from here. All right, let's talk Across the Spider-Verse. Now, if you've read the title of this segment, and I will be clipping these segments as I always do, with the Access Blockbusters pod, but if you've read the title of this segment, you might not be so happy with what I have to say about Across the Spider-Verse. Now, I want to preface this by saying that this is just my opinion. I frankly would love to hear dissenting opinions, because that's what the conversation is all about, is really having and fostering the kinds of conversations in which we can talk to one another, which we can disagree, but we can share our thoughts in a way that's respectful of one another and how we feel. So this is just me. I'm not trying to say this is definitive. I'm not trying to say, like, I have my own sensibilities as somebody who likes to think about stories in a certain way and whatnot. And I think that this film hit me in a certain way that I don't think it hit a lot of other people, though I have heard this complaint before. And I think it just bothered me a lot more than most people. But just wanted to say that these are just my thoughts, and I'd love to hear yours as well in the comments down below. This will be a full spoiler talk about Across the Spider-Verse. So if you haven't seen Across the Spider-Verse, please come back and make sure to watch this video after you have. And let's get into it. Yes, I think Across the Spider-Verse is phenomenal. I do. I think that it is just a masterpiece of artwork. It is phenomenal what they were able to do with the visual style, even able to elevate it just a little bit more than Into the Spider-Verse. But I don't think it's a complete movie. I don't. And I'll kind of go into a couple of reasons why. But first, I just wanted to talk about the things that I really loved about Across the Spider-Verse. First of all, the character work continues to be incredible. Every single character in Across the Spider-Verse is just fantastic. Now, for those of you who know my YouTube channel, you'll know that I wasn't actually the biggest fan of Into the Spider-Verse as well. I want to be clear that I liked a lot of the things that they were doing, and obviously I loved the visual style. I actually think that the story, though, was a little bit basic, which is a little bit weird to say because it's a multiverse story and there were a lot of crazy concepts, but I think that at the end of the day, sort of the story was a little bit, I guess it didn't really live up to the expectations that I had for the kind of concepts that they were going for, which is fine. That's just my personal opinion. But with Across the Spider-Verse, obviously the story here with sort of the canon events and disrupting canon is, I think it's a story that is, fitting of the kinds of concepts that they're going for visually as well. Now, we'll get into just why I'm a little frustrated about it, because I do think that the story here is quite fantastic, that they're starting to tell. But again, just the character work that they built upon from Into the Spider-Verse with Miles and his dad, Miles and his mom, Miles and Gwen. I really like the tension that's there, because Gwen, like, is Gwen really just going back to the the universe just to track the Spot, or does she really want to see Miles again? I think that those scenes where they're just kind of hanging upside down, really fantastic. Just love the emotion in those scenes. Love the emotion between the parents and Miles as well. And I think that the Spot could have been a really compelling villain. I think that the Spot is a really compelling villain for what, 15 minutes he's in this movie for. And I think that Miguel O'Hara as well, Oscar Isaac's Miguel, just a fantastic foil to Miles Morales. I really think that the themes in the story as well, about who you really are and whether or not you are allowing yourself to be defined by what other people tell you, but also just the moral and philosophical dilemmas of saving one life versus saving millions is obviously a dilemma that is, it's a philosophical conundrum that's as old as time, really. It's something that people talk about in things like war and whatnot. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to really like about Across the Spider-Verse, and there's a lot to really love about Across the Spider-Verse. The thing is, though, I left the theater feeling incredibly dissatisfied, because I believe that Across the Spider-Verse is just not a complete film. Now, here's what I'll say about that. Because the two big counter arguments that I've been hearing, I've watched a lot of reviews and heard a lot of people talk about, is Empire Strikes Back, and to a lesser extent, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. And I'll address those in a second. But I want to say that what I mean by an incomplete film is not necessarily that nothing really happens, per se. I'm not one of those people who are complaining that there's too much setup and there's too much, exposition, things like that. I actually thought that a lot of the setup and exposition in Across the Spider-Verse were really one of the strongest points of the film. What I'm saying, rather, is that the emotional stakes and themes and elements of the film that were supposed to really emotionally resonate with us as the audience were not resolved in this film in any kind of satisfying way, and were left to part two. Or I guess Beyond the Spider-Verse, because, Beyond the Spider-Verse, because Across the Spider-Verse was originally meant to be part one of a two-part story. And look, this might even just be personal preference. I really can't stand when films or TV shows resolve their own stories within themselves. That's why I was incredibly frustrated with Loki. This is entirely consistent with a lot of my thoughts from previous reviews and whatnot. I was incredibly frustrated with Loki because I think that while it resolved a part of its story, it decided to set up a lot more things for season 2 and just kind of let them hang in the balance. And I was not a big fan of that. Now, my favorite film in the MCU is Avengers Infinity War. But the reason that I really love Avengers Infinity War is because Avengers Infinity War is not a part 1. And we can get into really nitty-gritty things like story structure and 3-act structure and beginning sort of conflict resolutions and things like that. And maybe this is just me being narrow-minded and saying, not being willing to break out of that box. But I find it incredibly unsatisfying when that structure is sort of not, like, what is set up is not resolved, if that makes sense. I'm fine with, resolutions in which the heroes lose. And I think the Infinity War is a big example of that, because I love Infinity War. I love Infinity War because it's a complete story in which the heroes just happen to lose. That's great with me. Obviously, I'm not rooting for heroes to lose, but I'm just saying, in terms of story, that's totally great with me. But the emotional conflicts within the film, and they revolve really around Thanos, and his quest for the stones, what he has to sacrifice along the way to get them, I think is brilliant. And Avengers Endgame is clearly not a part 2. It's the next chapter in the story, just as much as Civil War is not part 2 of Avengers Age of Ultron. It's just the continuation of what happens after the fallout of Sokovia, right? And so, like, let me say that, I think that there are certain things that are set up in Across the Spider-Verse that I don't believe are tied together satisfyingly. For example, the Spot. Anyone else notice in Across the Spider-Verse that the Spot shows up for the first, maybe he's in the movie for the first 45 minutes or so, sort of intermittently, and then he disappears entirely? So we see sort of his origin. We hear him talking about his origin as he and Miles sort of fight across New York City, and that scene is fun, for sure. And then we see him again, sort of as he's sort of messing around with the collider and whatever, and then going into different dimensions. And then we see him again in, I believe, the Spider-Man India universe, and that's great. He's never seen again. Like, we hear, this whole thing about we got to contain the Spot because the Spot wants to kill, destroy the multiverse. And for Miles, the Spot wants to kill his father. And that's great and all. And it's sort of, it is a presence in the story. But the Spot himself is gone from the movie. Like, he's gone from the movie. And that's clearly because, in my opinion at least, that the resolution to that story is being set up for part 2. So in that regard, incredibly dissatisfying to me. Okay, so that's one. Number 2, and this is sort of a bigger thing for me than even the Spot, is the conflict and sort of impending resolution between Miles and his dad. Now, I know, if you're going to tell this story in which, the multiverse and canon events and Miles' dad has to die, but does he not have to die? That yes, like I don't think you can necessarily satisfyingly resolve that in itself in one film. I mean, obviously you could have restructured across the Spider-Verse, but just in the story that they gave us, I understand. There's still a lot more that needs to be told, for sure. What I'm talking about more so than just the physical resolution of the canon events and whether or not Miles' dad has to die is rather the emotional stakes, because I think that this film was on the cusp of it, with Miles telling his mom that he's Spider-Man, and I wish that he would have told his father that he's Spider-Man, because, well, I think that Gwen telling her father that she's Spider-Woman, and then, obviously having that moment at the end where Gwen's father gives up being the police captain, I think that that's a resolution for her character. I mean, this is still Miles' story. And I think that to just sort of leave that open-ended where the parents have to talk to Gwen Stacy instead, and they're just like, yeah, okay, go find her son. We're mad at him for leaving, whatever, but we hope you find him, blah, 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 blah. Is incredibly dissatisfying to me, because I feel like this entire movie, from that conversation, which is a beautiful conversation of Miles talking to his father over the wreckage of Alchemax, that is really setting up the emotional stakes of this film. And those emotional stakes are not paid off in this movie, because they will be paid off in Across and Beyond the Spider-Verse. I understand. But again, I think that the story had a responsibility to really to really wrap up what it had set out to really just what it had set up in general. And I just don't think it did that. Now, a lot of you are gonna say that this isn't a problem, and that you're willing to wait for the next part and then just sort of wait for the continuation of the story, and that's fine. I'm a little frustrated myself when storytelling says we're guaranteed a next part, so let's just take our time with this one. Like, I want to say that the way you do it is like Avengers Infinity War, where you have a story, and if Avengers, let's just say Avengers Infinity War came out, and for whatever reason it made $0 at the box office, and the MCU had to shut down after that. Well, it's a bummer because the heroes lost. Yes, it is a bummer because the heroes lost. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, we need a part 2 to figure out what happens next. No, what happens next is nothing, because that's the end of the story. And you can have your Avengers Endgame to give a more satisfying conclusion for us as audience members, because we want the heroes to win. But if there was no Endgame, frankly, and this might be a hot take, that's okay, because Avengers Infinity War told its own story. If there was no part 2 or whatever Beyond the Spider-Verse, I think that Across the Spider-Verse would be incredibly dissatisfying to a lot of you. Just incredibly dissatisfying. It's not just because it had sort of a small cliffhanger ending or anything like that, because it's cool. It's really cool the direction that they're going. It's just that it's not a complete story. And I said the exact same thing about Dune. I think that Dune Part 1 is a great half movie, but it's a half movie. And so while I really enjoyed Across the Spider-Verse, I left the theater incredibly dissatisfied. And I want to say that also, again, just going back to what I said earlier, that I've heard comments about, what about Empire Strikes Back and what about Two Towers? Those are also not necessarily complete movies, but you really enjoy those two movies and blah, blah, blah. So what I will say about The Empire Strikes Back is that I do feel like there is still more of a resolution to that film than there is with Across the Spider-Verse. And this might just be a weakness on my part because frankly, I wasn't old enough to watch The Empire Strikes Back in theaters and have to wait 3 years for Return of the Jedi, nor was I, the old enough to do that with the Two Towers for Lord of the Rings. And so to me, in my head, it's always those three films and those trilogies just tied together, which I understand is probably wrong of me to think that way. But it sort of just is the way that it's ingrained in my own head. And frankly, I think that the Two Towers, I might acknowledge, the Fellowship of the Ring is not necessarily the most complete film, and Two Towers isn't necessarily the most complete story in itself, but I think that there are resolution points in which I can feel satisfied. But I'm also watching the Two Towers with the understanding that I'm not just going to stop right there and just not watch Return of the King after that as well. Same with Empire and Return of the Jedi. Whereas I could probably watch Infinity War on its own and be okay. So I'm acknowledging that criticism is something that I'm not entirely sure how to square, because for me, I'm just not able to see those films in a vacuum. And perhaps when Dune Part 2 comes out and when Beyond the Spider-Verse comes out, I'll just kind of have to suck it up and say, I just got to watch those two films and those respective trilogies just back to back, because I don't see any other way to do it. And that's fine. I'm just saying for now, as I sit here and think about Across the Spider-Verse, there is no way for me to see this film as anything other than dissatisfying. And that, just to be abundantly clear, does not mean I dislike the film. I think that the movie is phenomenal. I also think it's unsatisfying. And I hope that through my thoughts here that I've been able to explain that a little bit better for you guys as well. So those are my thoughts on Across the Spider-Verse, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts as well. So leave them in the comments down below the YouTube video and let me know. And again, feel free 100% disagree with me, because I understand that my opinion is obviously not the popular one, and that is totally okay. I never had any qualms about that. And so, yeah, I just want to hear what you guys have to say about that as well. And with that, guys, that will do it for episode 27 of the Access Blockbusters pod. Now, in terms of content for future weeks, I am hoping that I will have a podcast out for next week. Not guaranteeing that, but we'll see where that goes. I'm hoping I will have something for you next week. But if not, I will have a podcast out eventually. Next week's going to be busy. I'm going to be moving around, and I just don't know where and when I'll be able to record, but I'll do my best. And then I also, like I said, I'm working on some videos right now that in case there aren't any podcasts, I'm hoping to be putting out. But guys, 1,000 subscribers, I might have just lost 50 subscribers just from that Across the Spider-Verse segment. It's okay. I never was shy about sharing my own opinions, but once we hit 1,000 subscribers, I'm so excited to celebrate, and to, I'm hoping to do maybe an AMA, or just something fun to celebrate. And so I'd love to hear your guys' suggestions for whatever we can do for the 1,000 subscriber special. In the meantime, guys, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. As always, make sure to give this video a like if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and give it a follow on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, and I'll see you guys in the next one.